Welcome to Artist Tales, the podcast that features and celebrates artists from different walks of life. I'm your host, Heather Martin, and this episode is threaded with rebellion, resilience, and a whole lot of needle and thread. My guest is Holly Searle, also known as the Subversive Stitcher. Holly is an award-winning textile artist based in London, who uses embroidery not just as a craft, but as a form of protest. In 2020, Holly launched her Subverted Vintage Tea Towel series, transforming the humble tea towel into powerful canvases for social commentary. But her journey began long before that, with a childhood steeped in the make-do and mend ethos, and a life-changing encounter in an exhibition at the Wellcome Collection in London, which featured a Victorian sampler stitched by a woman silenced by society. Welcome, Holly.
Oh, it's really nice to be here, Heather. How are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
Great, yeah, brilliant, yeah. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Well, thanks for being a guest. It's lovely having you as well. So I've obviously sort of talked a little bit about you and what you do, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I guess my creativity stems from the fact that I come from quite a creative family, but also I'm from an analog sort of generation, and I feel quite fortunate to have been part of that because we kind of had less back then, but we made more of it, if that makes sense. And also I'm quite fortunate that I think like I'm a Londoner. I was born in the middle of London. My parents are, we lived in like Soho when I was a kid. Well, I was born just after they lived in Soho. So we lived all over London in various different locations. So maybe that kind of adds something to your, like the way you kind of look at the world and everything. And then I didn't get on so well at school because I had lots of sort of difficulties with things there. And also we were always moving a lot. So that was quite difficult to maintain like a level sort of creativity, or not a level, I mean a good level of education and everything. But then when I got to be like an older kid, like a teenager, and I went to like secondary school, we always had, I was always good at doing the art classes. I was good at doing the making classes like needlework, which is what it was called then. And I used to enjoy doing that. And I also was fascinated with how my mum was so clever at being able to make things while she kind of like watched television, and she used to knit sweaters, and I begged her to sort of show me how to do all of these things. So I was really lucky. I mean, my grandma used to be a seamstress, and so I have this whole lineage of like the women in my family have always been like, I guess, fabric conscious, I suppose, or yarn conscious, or very good with all those things. And I was very lucky that I got to be a part of that, really, because I think nowadays kids are probably more adverse to having relationships with their phones or technology, whereas that's what I mean about coming from an analog time. So that's who I am, really. I'm just kind of someone who enjoys making things. I've always found that a really great way to express who I am in the world, and just to, find a voice. And even before we had all this recognized sort of status about mindfulness and everything, it would be a great way to just go and be quiet and just be by yourself and just kind of use that time to make something, to express yourself. So where in my life I was having, especially when I was growing up, I wasn't getting a lot of support with some things. It kind of like gives you a platform of your own support, if that makes sense. So that's who I am. And then when I grew up, I had a lot of things to do with my own life, and I became a mother, and I looked after my kids on my own, and that was quite difficult sometimes because, again, I had to be quite self-supportive as well as being in the position of sort of taking care of other people and everything, which I don't regret for 1 minute. I'm just saying that there's a strange pattern going on here about lack of support and everything. And then I think I got to a certain point where I became more freed up, but also I have this like real crossroad in my life where lots of things kind of all kind of smashed into each other at the same time, at work, at home, and in my personal life. And I realized that there was no color in my life. Everything was completely gray, and there was no kind of outlet really for me to recognize who I was anymore. So I took some time out, and I kind of realized in that space that I wanted to, sort of not, I don't think I ever really done anything where I kind of like purposely did everything. I've always kind of stumbled across it. So I kind of took that time to just sort of have some time for me, and and I found in that space that when I started making things again, I found my voice again, and I also rediscovered who I was. And that's, you're probably talking about maybe about 10 years ago now, 15 years ago that happened, that sort of realization. And then probably within the last sort of a good 10 years of that time, I've been sort of making sort of things and expressing myself through that medium of like using a needle and thread. Yeah, so that's who I am really, and how I kind of use creativity to find myself again. I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to have found that so late in life, you know.
I think, a lot of artists, will evolve even if they discover it fairly early on or come to it fairly early on. But, I've talked to other artists and they do come to art later in life, or they do start expressing themselves through art later in life. And it sounds like you've had a really rich life and such a journey in different things. Has that kind of influenced you in terms of, what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that when I actually just talking about it now, it makes me feel quite emotional, to be honest, because I'm realizing a lot of things later in life that I wish I'd had the opportunity to like turn around when I was a lot younger. But then having said that, life's really funny. It's like those kind of sliding doors moments, because if you hadn't have experienced all of the things that you've gone through on your own sort of like path in your life, all the chapters that you wrote during your life, then you wouldn't be the person you are currently, in your life. Like, so I think all of those things had a tiny effect, a massive effect, the way you relate to people, the friendships you make, how those friendships pan out, what happens with you, how you grow as a person. And also I think it's really important. One of the big lessons I learned in life was that for a long time during my life, I always used to kind of try to please other people by, I guess not being sort of passive, but it was kind of being passive, or I'd overlook my own feelings in the situation just to accommodate those of other people, which is really nice. It's nice to be kind of like thoughtful and, to take your time to sort of like make sure that whoever you're spending time with, you're being considerate of them. But there comes a point with me that I found that I kind of over tipped into that a lot during my, I guess, formative years. And so I don't even know how that happened. I mean, get me an analyst sort of thing. But as you get older, you kind of realize that you need to take more care of yourself, and you need to have that kind of check in with yourself more regularly, because that I think maybe that's what wisdom is. I think that probably is what it is,
I was going to say too that I think there's probably a number of factors here, experiences, or distances, or hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, absolutely.
You do have that sort of time to reflect. But I think too, that what you've said about some, wanting to please, I do wonder whether there's at least a couple of elements to it in terms of both being a woman and also being young. And I think it's not necessarily a women thing, but often the expectation is women are supposed to please. But I think even with, younger people, there is because you're young, your experience, you want to make a good impression sometimes, or quite often. I wonder if it's kind of age and gender.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's got a lot to do with, it's not got a lot to do with being a woman, but it's got a lot to do with being a woman in society at a particular time. Like, I'll give you an example. It's the 40th anniversary of like Live Aid, okay? And I remember, like, when it's really interesting when you watch that documentary about that even though realistically, Paula Yates, who was then Bob Geldof's wife, was the person who kind of came up with that idea. When you see them recording this video for like Feed the World and everything, all of the bands are just men. It's all men, and it's like, and it really, and like you say, hindsight is a wonderful thing, because when you watch it, you suddenly think, oh my goodness, there's no women in this apart from, Paula Yates and a few other people, and Bananarama, who are like the token sort of girl band. So why I'm telling you that is because when you see it now, it's quite shocking, because when you watch Glastonbury or something, and now you see all these incredible women artists, and they've always existed. They've just never been given platforms to vocalize who they are and everything. And so, but why I'm bringing that up as a thing is because during the 80s and everything, that's the time that I grew up. So as a woman in society, you kind of like knew your place. I know it wasn't the 50s or the 40s, but like, even if you think about the Me Too movement, okay, now I can tell you, hand on heart, there isn't one woman that exists on this planet that probably hasn't had some sort of kind of, weird happening on a train late at night, or been followed, or worried about all these things. It's just intrinsic in women to sort of to have that instinct. It's really peculiar, but it's kind of like it's our own survival mode. But we all have it because we've all been in those situations. So to say all those things about being a people pleaser and everything, it's kind of, I think all that is part of being a woman during a particular time. And now we live in a time which is much more lenient. Let's kind of call it like a leniency to being having an opinion about something, which is great, because it's not so much about, who you are as a person. It's more, well, no, it is more about who you are as a person, but it's less about your position in society. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. No, things move on and change.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of leads nicely into my next question. I was going to ask you about, so in my introduction, I mentioned there was the exhibition at the Wellcome Collection in London, and there was that sort of artwork or that piece that you saw that really influenced you or really, struck you. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was when people talk about like having epiphanies, I don't want to, come over too sort of strong and everything. But realistically, I'd been going through a lot of stuff in my life. And one of those things was like having mental health issues and all the things. I'd been under a huge amount of stress at work. I'd been bullied at work, and where I was living, there were all these antisocial behavior things going on that was affecting my family directly. So I was really frazzled at that time. And I remember I'd taken to sewing again, because I wanted to sort of like have a way of safeguarding myself, but also expressing my upset to all these things. I didn't know that at the time. Like you say, like looking back, it's so much easier to sort of identify these key moments in who you are and everything. But during that time, the Wellcome Collection, they were having an exhibition about mental health, and it was to do with Bedlam and everything. And I went along to that. It was a fabulous exhibition, and I really wasn't prepared for what I was going to see. So I'm going around the exhibition. Now, all through my life, and I said to you earlier about learning to sew and embroider through my mum and my auntie and my granny and stuff for my nan, it was like I'd always made samplers where I'd sort of kind of put your archetypal thing of home sweet home and things like this. I'd never, ever, ever thought about using words, which for a long time were my sort of enemy, or a needle and a thread, in a way to sort of protest about things. So I go around this exhibition, and there I come across these two samplers by this lady called Mary Frances Heaton. Now, she was a person in history, like there's lots of women in history like her. For example, like Mary Anning, who was a person who supported her family, who kind of got like, screwed over a bit by the establishment, which were men at that time. She wasn't accredited for finding dinosaur bones till very much later. But I see these two samplers by Mary Frances Heaton, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I never, ever, ever thought that you could use needlework in a way to have a platform. And she had been incarcerated because she dared to ask the local vicar whose children she had been tutoring if she could have the money, because that money was supporting her family. And what do you do with a woman who comes to you and basically publicly shames you, is what people would call that now, but quite rightly so? You put them in a mental institute, and she was locked up in a mental institute for 41 years in Wakefield Asylum. That's where she lived her whole existence. The good part of her life was spent in this asylum, and she didn't have Twitter or X or Instagram or any of these things that people have now when they have a grievance about something. So she used a needle and thread, which is what she had, very cleverly, I might add, to petition Queen Victoria about her plight being locked up in the asylum. Now, I have no historical references as to whether Queen Victoria ever saw those or whether she was ever aware of Mary Frances Heaton being locked in Wakefield Asylum for all those years. But I'm so glad that somebody somewhere kept those samplers as a point of reference about her life. I mean, that person's a genius, aren't they? And it's like, so when I saw those, I cried, and I just thought, oh my God, this really just like opened up this whole new experience for me to do with needlework and to do with how I could use that. Because I felt I'm really fortunate. I haven't been locked up in an asylum for 41 years, but I kind of felt that kind of epiphany where I felt like I could really relate to what she was talking about and everything, because I'd had so many experiences in my life where I felt like no one was listening to me or nobody was hearing me. And a lot of that was to do with being a woman. A lot of it was to do with lots of other things that I'd experienced in my life. And so here was someone who was literally calling me from history and saying, look what I did, you know that you want to do something similar. You must do. This is the way to do it. This is the way to be heard. And that's how I then changed, that relatable experience like that.
It almost seems like it was a spark for you to see that and to kind of think, actually, this is something I can do,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about that Billy Joel song, We Didn't Start the Fire, it's like probably that moment that I probably had all the tools and everything I needed in that moment, but that definitely would have been a lyric, in a song like that. So
as I mentioned in the introduction, you launched the Subverted Vintage Tea Towel series in 2020. So 2020, 5 years ago, we're in 2025 now, we had just gone, I presume it was kind of lockdown and that sort of thing. So I guess the question I'm having is a two-parter, really. So you're known as the Subversive Stitcher and the Subverted Vintage Tea Towel series. So how did that come about? Because, although we were kind of talking about the spark you saw, or that kind of spark, you had at the Wellcome Collection exhibition, what kind of took you in that direction of being kind of subversive?
Well, I think all my work before that was very subversive. All the work I did was very subversive because I was kind of calling out very uncomfortable things that I wanted to discuss in my work. So I'd actually accumulated quite a lot, even though I was working on a particular piece. When I saw that kind of lit this touch paper for all the things that followed on for it. And all those things were very uncomfortable things that I wanted to talk about in embroidery. And I won an award for that. I had a solo show, and then lockdown happened, and so we go into lockdown. But you see all the things that I had encountered in in society with my friends, listen to a TV show, listen to a radio show, or listen to a podcast or something. All these things were suddenly just about COVID. So there was nothing that gave me any incentive. And I wasn't thinking about me retrospectively. I was thinking about the future then. I was thinking about, what's happening? Are we all going to die? I mean, it was really, really scary at the beginning of COVID. Do you remember? It was like we had all this news about Italy and we were like, oh, that's there. It can't be here. And then all of a sudden it was here, and it was just, it's making me like the hairs on the back of my arms stand up now, because it was so terrifying at the beginning. And we were all kind of like, oh my God, like what's going to happen? Are we all going to die? And it was just terrifying. So needlework and being subversive wasn't the first thing that was on the top of my mind. Anyway, so I'm sharing a house with my children and my grandchildren during that time. And it was a really quiet summer because all the planes had stopped flying. Nobody was going anywhere. And I couldn't think of anything to do. I wasn't really, because then my brain kind of switched into a more relaxed mode, because we didn't all die suddenly. There weren't zombies coming. We weren't all going to have to sort of like, put planks on the window or anything and get a bunker to live in. So I came a bit more relaxed then. So in that kind of relaxed mode, I started to just sort of like think, oh, I've got that itch again. I really want to make something. Because I'm not getting that gratification, because the amount of endorphins that you get from, creating work, well, I find is just incredible. It really kind of sets me up and everything. So I start thinking, oh, well, I can't think of anything because everything is COVID. So I start just looking online, and I'm looking on eBay, and I'm looking at vintage textiles, and I go down this long, long path of like Alice in Wonderland, and I end up falling down a rabbit hole and end up looking at tea towels. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, tea towels. I can't remember the last time I had a tea towel. And they were so evocative of the past, of like my childhood, my granny, going to my grandma's house and things like this. And also they were very kind of like, it's like there's that museum in London, the Museum of the Brands, which is fantastic. But so then I started to recognize things on them that I hadn't seen for years. So it was bringing back all of this started my creative juices flowing. And I suddenly thought, oh, these are just like really beautiful. And I call them little domestic works of art, because I just think they're so stunningly beautiful, and they just belong to, like me, like being analog like I am, they belong to a different time. So I decided to get a few of them and see if I could do something with them. And I thought, and I was doing a lot of work with felt. I had been doing a lot of work with felt, and I thought, I had these like fridge magnets. So you've got two unconscious domestic things here. Fridge magnets, which you teach people things with, but I'm not thinking this intelligently at the time when I'm doing it. So I get loads of these tea towels, and I just use them as a canvas on which to have a say about something. So I thought, so here I am again in the same position where I'm using a different methodology to just raise awareness about something, or something that I want to say. And I've always had this kind of like point of view about the work I do. I don't ever really do work to sort of make other people, like that people pleaser thing I was talking about. I don't do that with my work, because the only person I'm pleasing when I'm doing it is myself, which makes it so gratifying for me to achieve that. So when I started doing the subverted tea towels, I thought, oh, I'll do a few of these, and maybe I'll do 100. And it was like, then they started showing like Grayson's Art Club on Channel 4. I don't know if you can remember that. And it was like,
I do.
that was quite inspirational, because people were making art at home, and I was thinking, oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing it with tea towels and stuff. All is not lost. I'm being creative again. And it just went from there, really. So they became a nice little project, because I do lots of different projects, but they became a little project that I never would have thought 5 years into the future, one, we all wouldn't be in COVID, worrying about a zombie apocalypse. And I would have shown them at lots of different locations, and lots of people come. And at that point, it's really weird, because the Clark Kent sort of part of me, which is Holly Searle, and the superhero part of me, which is the Subversive Stitcher, kind of like, I'm actually quite an introverted extrovert. And it's like, it's very difficult for me in those situations, because I'm like, oh my God, people are going to come, and I probably don't look like what they think the person who made these details will look like. And so that's quite weird. But but people always get so much from seeing them. And it's just it's a real trip, like when you see that, that people, you get that, and you get that feedback. It's really, I don't think I'll ever get used to that. I don't think I ever will at all. So that's how they came about. They were just something that I rather wonderfully kind of fell down a hole, and I rather wonderfully discovered them, and they all came back into my life, and I and a bit like things from the past calling you, like Mary Frances Heaton, and with all due respect to her, I suddenly thought, well, maybe I can say things about things that are going on in the contemporary world now that I can raise awareness of and give them a bit of a soapbox on which to call out to the world, sort of thing. So each of them have a individual title, and they each have a context, which is all listed on my website and everything. So, and now there's 100, and I'm just about to do 183 actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's quite a lot. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I don't know where they go. They keep me company, and they keep my brain agile, I think, to think about things I want to say.
Yeah, it's kind of your canvas, really, in many ways. Would you like the kind of collection to stay together, or would you sell individual pieces?
I've had on this like long sort of journey I've had with them, where I've shown them. It's really funny because I was just thinking they're on display at the moment, and I was thinking, oh, it's really funny. I can see where I stopped where I was at the last exhibition and where I was at the one before that. So they're great. It's growing all the time, and I get people that come to all the shows and they ask me if they're for sale. Can I buy that one? Can I do this one? I mean, people can get prints of some of them. They're not all photographed because it's just like, just because you're someone who's an artist, you don't you don't have huge amounts of money, and being an artist is an incredibly costly life to live. You have to get all your materials. You don't have regular income and everything. So people do ask me if individual ones are for sale, but I've tried to keep them all together because I just want to see how far I can go with them, really. So people can get prints of different ones, but I don't know what the objective is. I think maybe I'd like to do a book eventually of them. I think that would be a great thing to do. But yeah, but I'd like to I don't know, if I was ever going to sell them, I would like to sell them as one body, because they're actually a diary of events that have expanded the last 5 years. And I think that's a really interesting perspective to look at.
It is, and as you were talking, and I have looked at your website and a number of the tea towels, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is almost like it's your social commentary of what you've been through, what you've seen, that sort of thing. But also, you mentioned earlier, the tea towel is very domestic. And it's also made me think of other kind of projects like the AIDS Quilt Project or the Grenfell Memorial Quilt. So Grenfell was the tower block that burned down a number of years ago, and I think this year in 2025 they're looking to dismantle it at some stage because it's become apparently unsafe. But it's kind of those community projects, or potentially community projects, or what potentially turned into a community project, but in a very, as what we tend to think about quilts and tea towels and other things and stitching is very domestic, but in a very powerful way that delivers quite a powerful message with such impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's really interesting you say all of those things, because it's really funny, because sometimes in my head, I think it's like my own Twitter feed when I'm doing it, and it's like each one of them says something about something, but I'm not, but there's, and then I guess on Instagram, people say things if it resonates with them. But it's really interesting to talk about community like that, because I'm just like, I went to see recently, I was really lucky that I got to the Tate to see the AIDS quilts, like the ones that were made in the UK. They're only there for like a really brief time at the week for a weekend. And they were just like, again, all these things are really evocative of a time. Like if you were around in the 80s, then you would have had the echo. You would know what the echo of what that experience was like for people that got HIV, and it was called AIDS, and what happened to them and how they were boycotted by society and things like this. So all of these social things really resonate with me. I've lived through a lot of things that are really important in our existence, And I think with things like Grenfell, that is so fantastic. I went and met with them because I kind of met, I don't want to say I know Tuesday really well, but she's such an incredible force of nature that she was putting that together. but again, all of these kind of, like you say, domestic. Is it domestic? I mean, are we kind of like thinking it's domestic because women are associated with domesticity, and there's a lot of people who are guys that do a lot of stitching as well, aren't they? But I suppose it's like I've got my own theory about like the art world, where people, it's like there's a class system within the art world about what people perceive as art, and it's like whereas there's loads of art and creativity going on all over the place, but it's just what people recognize, like a Reuben or something, and they just sort of they will always think of that as art. Whereas there's art, I've met so many people on my own experience of being an artist who are just such incredible people who've all got this, this whole thing going on about society and what they want to do, and they're just amazing, and it's so it's a community. It's a really good community to be a part of. It's so wonderful. It really is.
No, definitely. And I think to your point about whether or not it's domestic, I think in some circles it's, could be seen as domestic, but really I think what people are doing are using materials or using things that are available to them. And, maybe, when they've started or at certain times in society, it's seen as domestic because it's seen as women's work, let's say, or, not proper art, but they are art because those are the materials that people had and they expressed themselves, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting what you say about that, because I went to see Grayson Perry's like Delusions of Grandeur exhibition at the Wallace Collection last week. And he does that. He does I had the audio thing when I was going around looking at it, but he was such a huge amount of work that had gone into that exhibition. But that's what he said. He said, I used all these things I had lying around my house and everything. And it's like, and that's so fantastic. But yeah, exactly. I think people, that is creativity. It's like, which is a strange irony, because we live in a society now where with one click, you can order something from a well-known online site and it'll be at your door the next day. And we just have too much stuff now. But all the stuff that we have, the creativity that you can amass from reusing it. And I don't know, I find we live in a world now where a lot of that doesn't exist with a lot of people, whereas a lot of people just replace things. They don't think about that kind of reusable way that you can use things, and that's that's where the clever comes in, doesn't it? That people are able to repurpose something for another effective thing. And that's exactly what people do when they make quilts. That's exactly what people do when they all band together to create a project. And it's always things that you reuse. It's never, I rarely ever get new things to use in my work.
Definitely. And I think it's, it's kind of repurposing, as you say. Just going back to you mentioning you've been in some exhibitions and people are really engaged with the work. And I find that quite interesting because you describe yourself as coming from an analog era, and which in all honesty isn't that long ago.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, like we're talking kind of the 90s was the tipping point. But, it's interesting that, we can make assumptions about today and people are really into the digital, which I think there's truth to that. But also I think there's a culture of engaging with the analog, and that can be your stitching, your knitting. It's almost like a revival of some of these things, that the stitching, the knitting, analog photography, analog film, those sorts of things, that it's almost like in some ways a counterculture. So, I mean, you said you've had some really good engagement, and, could you tell me a little bit about that, about how people react to your work?
Yeah, I mean, people, one thing that always amazes me, like I said, each of the details has its own title, and it has its own context. But it's always really interesting that people immediately kind of bring their own context to it when they see the work. And so I find that really interesting when people come along. And then I showed them at the knitting and stitching show last year. It was just phenomenal, the space that they were on show in. And so when you walked into Alexandra Palace, which is this massive venue in North London, they were in the the atrium as you came in, which I couldn't have asked for a better place for them to be shown. So people that were coming in there just got this massive burst of colour when they came in. And yeah, it was just fantastic. And very often the negativity I get comes from the place that is maybe hosting them because they're afraid of a backlash, because a few of them have, seriously, like a handful of them probably have swear words on them, but I don't use the swear words on purpose to make you annoyed or I'm just using a swear word. There is a context behind that. But also what I found interesting from my perspective was that the ones that they asked me to they said, oh, we're going to have to get these ones taken down because they've got swear words. So I was thinking, okay. So I used that to my advantage and I created a caution line. So I had all those details facing a wall, and then people that came, they could see them if they wanted to see them. So I thought, well, I'm not going to, and the people that were, looking after the space said, yeah, that's okay, as long as we can't see them. But the interesting thing was some of them have really interesting dark content, which doesn't have a swear word in, and all of those ones were still left up. But then I had, kids coming to that show, not to see me, but coming to knitting and stitching show, and they'd see these things and they were like blown away by them. They were going, this is so awesome. And so, like you say, going back to that point about analog digital, it's kind of like, I find that really such a buzz that people are coming, like younger people are coming and they're seeing that and they're really getting a lot from that. But then the best thing about that show was I had a lady who'd brought her mum with her, and her mum is like 99 years old, and her mum was just so brilliant. And she said to her daughter, you have to take me around there so I can go and talk to Holly, because I want to go and speak to her and tell her how wonderful I think these are. So there you go. I mean, that's just, I really have that kind of ethos that people are either drawn to things or they're not. And I think if you're not, it's not your thing, that's fine. Then you don't have to engage with that. There is a negative side to it, which I don't know whether to take that as a compliment, but I've had a few pieces go missing as well, which I've had to kind of deal with that, which has been quite uncomfortable, because that really upsets me. I mean, nobody would sort of people, because that's really weird as well, because you sort of think, do people not know that this is like, I've put so much work into this, and people are just like deciding they're going to take something home with them, just like it's that they can. And that just really upsets me sometimes. So, but anyway, that all kind of turned out all right in the end. So that's another story. But but positivity, I think people are always they love them. They think they're great, and they just, they get a lot from them. Yeah, which is fantastic. There's not, as a person who makes things and creates things, there's not really much more you could want from something,
No, it sounds really positive. And I'm just thinking too, like, it sounds like it's been very positive in terms of the engagement and feedback. And it sort of sounds like the Subversive Stitcher really has taken off. Did you get much kind of engagement, or did you do much, many exhibitions or shows before you became the kind of known as the Subversive Stitcher?
No, I've only ever had that. I've only ever engaged in having shows, or as that person, as my sort of alter ego moniker, really, the Subversive Stitcher. So sometimes I sort of think, oh, I don't want to be the Subversive Stitcher, but that's who that person is, sort of thing. So it's still like who I am, but Holly at home is like very quiet, and I like to potter about and do things like everybody. I mean, everyone does that, don't they? I mean, I think that's part of creativity. You just have to have a mind space for yourself to work out what you're doing. And sometimes that means that you're just hoovering your living room or something, or, cleaning your windows, I don't know, or just stroking the cat or something. And it's like you suddenly think, oh, actually, that's made me think about this, and that's how creativity grows, how you find a space for it by making a space for yourself. Yeah, so so both, I just have to accept that both those things are a part of who I am, really.
And I think that's probably true for many artists as well. Now, I did look at your website, and you do have a couple of other projects. One is I Am Woman project, and the other is Surly Queen Suit.
Yes.
So could you tell us a little bit more about those two?
Okay, so I have with my Surly Queen suit, because my name is Searle, and Searle means armorer in which is quite interesting. So I guess that's where the term "you're being surly" comes from. Okay, and I've always had this fascination with pearly kings and queens, and my dad was a proper East Ender. He was born just off the Roman road, and it was like, so I don't even know how I started doing that. I thought it was like I set myself a little test, and I thought, if I try and do things properly as well, like take my time and do them properly. I don't, because I have a tendency to rush things as well, and then you don't always enjoy it. It's like eating really fast or something. So I thought, oh, I'd love to do something like that. And then one night my friend Chris sent me this picture of someone she'd encountered at a party wearing a pearly queen jacket, and I thought, right, that's it, the challenge is on, because I'm quite competitive as well. So I kind of thought, well, what am I going to put on my surly queen jacket? So it started with a jacket, and I thought, well, what are the tropes that pearly kings and queens have? It's all about where they're from and things like this. So those were the kind of, and then I had all these little motifs that meant something to me, and motifs that were kind of classic pearly kings and queens things. So I did the jacket, and I absolutely loved it. I wish I could show it to you, Heather, because it's like the clink of it is so heavy, because the mother of pearl buttons they just weigh so much, but it really swishes and stuff when you walk. And then I made it into a suit, because then it took me ages to find the right skirt to go with the jacket and everything. Yeah, so I did that. And then I always remember watching those old sort of films. And there was a guy called Terry Thomas, and he used to go ding dong like that. And I thought, I really want to put that on the back of my skirt. So there was like a lot of me in that. So it was all about me, that suit, about the surly queen. So it was like, Holly Searle, the surly queen sort of thing. And I was really fortunate, because that was shown in an exhibition as well. And I was really blown away by that. So I love it. It's like, it's one of my favorite pieces that I've ever done. I'll be doing more pearl button work as well, because I really love to engage to do that. It's very effective. It's like, it just looks so good. It's really effective when you see it. And like I say, it's so tangible as well, like the way it feels and everything. And with the I Am Woman project, that was something I'd been to see a Louise Bourgeois exhibition at the South Bank. And I just thought, I was just blown away by, like, her work is just so incredible. And it's like being an artist, like, you like a lot of artwork, but you don't always relate to it. It's not all of it is relatable, but like Louise Bourgeois, I just thought, oh my God, it's like watching a film, and you don't have to watch the subtitles, because you know what she's talking about just through all the medium of the things she's creating. And she had all these like floating women figures, and I thought, wow. And that kind of like stayed in my head for a while, because this is how ideas sort of generate in my head and everything. And I went away and I was like thinking, God, that's really stuck with me. It'd be so cool to like do something like that. And then I was thinking, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to make a woman out of all the experiences of other women? So that's how that project came about. So I just did a call out on Instagram, and I invited people to send me like a piece of fabric or a piece of paper, something. You didn't have to be a stitcher, but majoritively all the ones that got given to me were people that could stitch and everything. And then it was an all female thing. So I had like the duvet I used was given to me by my friend Bettina. Then I got my daughter to lay on the thing, and I drew round her. And then I just filled it all in with all these experiences. But it was such a emotional collaborative project, because what I found about other women's experiences was that we all generally experience quite a lot, unfortunately, of the same experiences, like sexual harassment and, you know, being overlooked in the workplace. And that just goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about a different time and a place, and a woman's role in society at a particular time and everything. And it was really emotionally upsetting a lot of the things that I got sent, but it was also incredibly empowering for all the women that had contributed, because some of those women had never, ever told those stories before. So I felt a real honor and a privilege that I was able to share that. It was quite overwhelming.
That sounds really interesting, those two projects. Now, my last question is, it sounds like you've had such an amazing, I don't know if career is the right word, but probably journey in terms of an artist. What's next? Where do you see yourself going with what you're doing?
Oh, where do I see myself going? That's a really hard question to answer, because I've been so fortunate. I've kind of just ended up in sort of situations. I think it's really important to say yes to a lot of things, because you just meet your circle of acquaintances of people that you meet and get so much. It's like a ripple on the pond. It's like you then end up meeting someone else, and you just put yourself out there and you meet other people. But where would I see all of these things going? It's very difficult when you kind of work for yourself, as it were, because you're always, you're your manager, you're your own HR person, all these sort of various things, and you're the person who's doing all the work at the same time. So I learn a lot of things, because I learned that where my work works and where it doesn't. Like, for example, last year I sort of put some time into just having some market time, like in a market store, to see what that would be like. And even though that didn't kind of work out in a way, because it wasn't the right space for me, I was contacted by someone, and then I did a project this year, which was really fantastic, the Wendy project over in Croydon with the arts team there. And that was just absolutely phenomenal, doing that for International Women's Day. So I don't know. I think in the future, there seems to be a lot more things coming up now where people are approaching me and asking me if I'd like to be a part of something, or if I'd like to be involved in something. But ultimately, I think I'm really enjoying just being who I am, and I don't really plan anything. But yeah, so I just kind of keep going, to be honest, Heather. I don't know if you're aware that I wasn't very well a couple of years ago. I was diagnosed with breast cancer as well. It's 7 years actually this year that I'm kind of now in remission. But it's like, I think when something like that happens to you as well, so all the other things I told you that happened prior to me having that, because that happened while I've been on my sort of art experience sort of thing. So I'm just really grateful. Like, everything that happens to me, I feel really fortunate, and I feel really sorry, I don't want to sound all evangelical or anything like that, but what I mean is, it's like I just try and I do as much as I can. I love doing my subversive tea towel workshops. I do those quite regularly at Fashion and Textile, and I meet a lot of people like that. But ultimately, I'd love to keep exhibiting the tea towel series, because I think it's just I love showing it. It's like having it's like being proud of your other child sort of thing that's achieved so much, and it's so lovely to sort of meet people and engage with them. And what would I like to do? I've got little rotations of projects that I work on. Some things I've never shown to people. I like working with old black and white photographs as well, and in putting embellishing them with sequins and things like that to sort of make a different statement about things. I like doing a lot of wall tapestry work. I like subverting old tapestries. I work with those sometimes. I'm always willing to try something different, because sometimes it's like, all other creatives will know this. If you stick to one thing all the time, you become so incredibly bored. It becomes like a chore. So I always call it like my artistic crop rotation in my head, because I start doing something and I think, yeah, I'm a bit bored of that now. So I just want to do something else. And then I think, oh, I'm really missing that. So that's why I love doing the tea towels, because they're so easy for me to do. And it's like, they're so accessible and everything. And so sometimes when I talked about that dopamine here, it's like so nice that you can suddenly go, oh, that's a really good idea. I really want to say something about that. And I get a really good feedback from it straight away, like chemically in my body sort of thing. So I don't really know. I'm not really saying anything, because I don't really know where I'm going and what I'm doing, but I'm always open to things. And yeah, it'd be great if, it'd be great if there was some kind of character in the art world who went, oh my God, these are great. I want to give you £1 million. And I'll go, yep, that's great. Now I can get my pink house that I've always wanted and put my owl door knocker on the front door and just carry on making things.
Well, and I think sometimes it's great just not to have a plan.
Yeah,
just go with
absolutely.
life. Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you. It's been lovely having you as a guest on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Heather. I've had a really lovely time.
And I've had a really lovely time chatting with you as well, so thank you. Thanks for tuning in to my conversation with Holly Searle, the Subversive Stitcher. I hope her embroidered provocations and playful defiance left you thinking differently about the power of thread, domesticity, and protest. Holly's work reminds us that even the quietest materials can carry the loudest messages. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out Holly's website and social media handles. Links are in the show notes. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it with friends, leave a review, or help spread the word. Your support keeps these stories alive. In the next episode, I'll be speaking with Jane Thackerden, a participatory artist of British and Guyanese heritage, whose textile-based practice weaves together threads of activism, mental health, and community care. Jane's work is deeply rooted in co-creation and trauma-informed engagement, blending her background in social work with her passion for art to create spaces for healing, protest, and connection. From protest banners to collaborative quilts, her pieces are as much about collective voice as they are about personal expression.